Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me on episode 65 of Untold Evidence. Now today we revisit with a few more points, something we've already discussed before, something that I find incredible that it happened, something that I feel should be spoken about a little bit more, and something that would probably help give people's framework of humanity a lot more sense if we acknowledged and noticed this. So today, we talk about the Americans who hired the Nazis to build rockets to the moon. This should ring a bell, but let's get started. The man whose rockets put American astronauts on the path to the moon, who had a few years earlier been a member of the SSS party as well as an officer. His name was Wernher von Braun, and he was not an exception. As stated before, although he was the most famous face of a deliberate United States government's program that brought roughly 1,600 German scientists and engineers to America after the Second World War. Some of them had been bystanders to the Nazi regime. Fair enough. However, some of them had not. The program that brought them over had its own rules to do it all. In the final months leading to the end of the Second World War, as Germany collapsed, the Allied powers understood that the German scientific establishment was an enormous prize. Germany had been ahead of the World War in several fields: rocketry, jet propulsion, aviation medicine, chemical engineering. Now this is something that I had never found out. I don't think we were ever told this at school or in any subsequent educational system. This was brand new learning for me as I delved down the alternative history. I did not realise Germany were this far ahead than other forces at that time. In itself, that is suspicious. But we carry on. The United States and the Soviet Union both wanted that expertise, and both wanted to deny it to the other. Now, this was not yet the Cold War in name, but the logic of the Cold War was already well underway. The American effort began under the name Operation Overcast. However, it was soon to be renamed. The new name came from a small administrative detail. The files of the German specialists selected for the program were marked with a paperclip. Therefore, the operation became known as Operation Paperclip. It was run through a body called the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, and almost immediately the agency ran into problems. The problem was quite clearly the law. President of the time, Harry Truman, authorised the program, but he attached a clear condition. The United States was not to bring over anyone who had been an active supporter of Nazism or of militarism. The condition collided directly with the reality. Many of those most valuable German scientists, the ones with the deepest expertise, had been Nazi Party members. Some had held positions that went well beyond passive membership. If the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency had applied Truman's conditions honestly, a large portion of the target list would have been disqualified. So, according to the documentary history record assembled by historians, the agency did not apply it honestly. Investigators rewrote security reports. We spoke about this in a previous episode. Damaging details about party membership and wartime conduct were softened or just removed. Files, in the plainest terms, were sanitized so that the scientists could pass the screening that Truman had ordered. This was the core controversy of Operation Paperclip, and it is no speculation, it is documented. The program to bring these men to America worked by getting them past a restriction the president had personally set. Now, before we move on, I have lots of conversations with how deep is the military-industrial complex, how far does this rabbit hole go? At least in this day and age, we can see quite clearly that the American infrastructure below the president's authority disregarded what the president had to say and its direct orders. It did this for its own volition and its own need. It got away with it. It was only historically found out. My argument whenever I hear cases like this is, what else is this relevant for? I find it very difficult to believe that this is a one-off. I don't believe it's a one-off. Tell me in the comments where you think this could have happened more. But for now, we go further. So to understand why it mattered morally, you have to look at whether von Braun's rockets had actually been built. So the German V2 rocket, the weapon von Braun's team developed, was in its later production stage manufactured at an underground facility called Mittelwerk. The labour at Mittelwerk was supplied by a concentration camp. Prisoners worked and died in the tunnels in large numbers. By many historical estimates, more people died building the V2 than were killed by the weapon itself. Von Braun visited Mittelwerk. The exact extent of his knowledge and his responsibility has been debated by historians for decades, and the debate is genuine. What is not in serious dispute is that the rocket program that he led was in its production phase entangled with the concentration camp system. And then a few years later, the same man stood in Huntsville, Alabama, leading, yes, you heard that correctly, leading the very program that would help build America, the Saturn V. That is the very rocket that carried the Apollo missions towards the moon. He became a public figure, a televised presence, an American success story. The exact same hand, the exact same brain, just a different flag. Now let's talk a little bit about the counter-argument. Now the case for the defence, because Operation Paperclip has one and it deserves to be heard properly. First, the strategic argument. In 1945, the alternative to the United States recruiting these scientists was that the scientists would not simply retire, it was that the Soviet Union would recruit them instead. The Soviets ran their own parallel operation, and from the perspective of American policymakers, leaving that expertise on the table meant handing it over to a hostile power. The choice as they saw it was not between clean hands and dirty hands. It was about which side of the expertise would serve. And I do understand this point. It seems implausible to think that if they didn't go to America, they would go somewhere else, and that would be quite clearly Russia. Now, what you think the Russian-American War, the Cold War, the technical developments and all that were after that, at least at this stage, I can understand and even agree with bringing over that expertise to the quote-unquote good guys. Now, second, the contributions were very real. The American space program, the satellites, the Apollo program drew directly on the work of the Paperclip scientists. It's very likely it would not happen without them. Lives were not only taken in this story, knowledge that came out of it was genuinely advanced. And thirdly, the question of individual guilt. Operation Paperclip brought over 1,600 people. They were not interchangeable. Some had been genuine bystanders, conscripted into a system they did not control. Others, however, were closer to the machinery of the regime. But treating all 1,600 as equally culpable is clearly not correct. There were different levels of involvement with the SS across these scientists, but their expertise clearly shone through. So the honest reckoning is uncomfortable in both directions. The strategic logic was real, the Soviet competition was extremely real, and the scientific gains were evident for us all to see. And the program still worked by the laundering the records of the men connected to one of history's most horrific and worst crimes. It is in direct defiance of the presidential order. So what Operation Paperclip leaves you with is not a simple villain. It is a question about a country and whether it is willing to absorb and what it is willing to absorb in the name of an advantage. The United States did not stumble into this. It made a conscious decision. It decided the expertise was worth the compromise, and then it altered its own paperwork to make the compromise invisible. The moon landing, one of the genuine high points of human achievement, has this as its very foundation. America hired the men who built Hitler's rockets, and at the time they were the most advanced rockets in the world. And then it pointed these rockets to the stars. Both of these sentences are true, and the country has never fully decided how to hold them at the same time. The declassified Paperclip records are referenced in the description, so tell me in the comments where you land on it. Necessary compromise, or a line that was probably crossed? We'll read them and discuss them together. From a personal standpoint, I really do see this one both ways. That kind of knowledge is generational. The more I understand about Nazi Germany, the more I realise just how advanced and efficient those scientists were. They brought to us things that we had never seen and maybe never would see. So where do we stand? Truly, I don't know. Russia took over 2,000 of them. If Russia had all of them, the 4,000 that were available, what would the world look like today? It could look completely different. The issue we have, as ever, with UFO, alien tech, alternative thinking, is disclosure. Because we find out so little of the truth, it is really hard to put these into context. If we knew more, we may be able to have a better decision in whether we think it's good or bad. But from what you've heard from this episode and what you understand in general, please do let me know. As ever, if we've misrepresented anything or misinformed you, get it in the comments and we will set the record straight. Together, we all want to follow the evidence. Thank you very much for joining me today, and we will see you in the next episode.